Thanks everyone for being here today. Also, I would like to say before I start a big thank you to the D&AD and New Blood Festival for having me, being able to share my experience and journey that I've been on with my smartphone. So let me grab my clicker and yeah, let's begin. So today's agenda, I will start by briefly introducing myself. Then I will go into my life story, well, the part that includes where a smartphone pretty much changed my career path. Then I'm going to talk about 4 of my favorite projects that I've worked on, followed by some of my favorite apps, some smartphone camera hacks, and some of the gear that I use when I'm using my smartphone for projects. And then we'll finish off by looking at some of the latest commercial smartphone use within the industry itself. And then we'll finish off with a Q&A. So I'm Balwinder Bartler, better known as Mr. Whisper on the internet. I'm a multidisciplinary creator and creative director. I also work as a full-time commercial photographer, and I am a published photographer too. I specialize in street photography, documentary, and I have a great passion for low-light work, which is probably what I'm best known for. You can learn more about my commercial work on my website, mrwhisperstudios.com, which hasn't been updated in a while, so there still needs to be some of my latest projects put up there. Or you can follow me along for my day-to-day journey on Instagram, which is Mr. Whisper, or for longer form content, I have just joined YouTube, and it's Mr. Whisper TV. So over the last decade, I've been very lucky to work with, these are some of the brands that I've worked with, and I have worked with them in various capacities. I've done it as, I've curated exhibitions for them, I've done photo walks for them, I've done practical and inspirational workshops, run masterclasses, seminars, sat on Q&A panels, or just straight up shot their photography campaigns. Now, these are a few of the campaigns that I've shot for them, but the best part about this is that how the brands have understood and been able to make a connection between my street photography, editorial style, and how it would work and apply within the commercial world. I've worked on, very lucky to have worked on film sets, TV sets, with fashion brands, cars, alcohol, sports brands, celebrities, travel, tech, festivals. I mean, you name it, I've done it. I've probably worked with most of the smartphone brands out there as well. So it's been quite a mixed bag of work, as you can see, but I've absolutely, enjoyed the journey. And I think, full transparency, a lot of this work was shot with my big camera, not with the smartphone. There's a few photos on the outskirts here, which you can see is shot with a phone. However, if I hadn't have embraced my smartphone camera probably about over 10 years ago, none of this would have been possible. So, obviously, to stay relevant in this day and age, I've had to translate the Mr. Whisper brand into video. So I've started making shorter form content, long form content, which took me a little bit of time to kind of translate how I would do that, but now I'm slowly finding my feet and I'm really enjoying that creative process. So now let's go back over a decade to where my journey began. And, I hope this doesn't feel like a history lesson to you guys. It should be a bit more inspiring. So let's start with my story about how a smartphone camera changed my life. So before becoming a commercial photographer and creator, I worked in Adland as a creative director. And 2 of my last full-time clients were Apple, and then it was Samsung. For Apple, my role there was ultimately they had just released the iPhone, and they were bringing out apps into the market, and they wanted people to understand how to use apps. So that was my main role. I was locked up in a lab with a tech guy. I was the creative lead, and we were working on various ad formats to be able to reach out and put on various websites to get this message across. When Samsung caught wind of this, they kind of headhunted me, and they were like, you know what, we love what you're doing with Apple, but could you come over and help us? We're about to launch our first smartphone, which was called the Samsung Galaxy. And, I was like, I think I could do something like that. So my role at Samsung was basically to, I was the digital creative director there, and my role there was basically to put all digital campaigns at the heart of everything they were doing. I looked after everything from fridge freezers, TVs to smartphones. But smartphones were really where my head was at, and I really had a passion to learn more about those. So I remember, social media was growing at the same time, and I was getting into that. I was like, had this instinct or this urge to upload every day, and Facebook was around, Twitter was around, various blogs were there. So I would join them because I like to be someone who practice what they preaches, understand how they work, and understand how we could use them within our social campaigns. So, but sadly, a lot of them involved writing, and me being a visual storyteller, I was pretty shit at most of them. So my wife nudged me one day and said, you know what, the cool kids in South Korea are using this app called Instagram. I think you might want to give that a go. So opened up the app, and I was immediately hooked. And, I guess a lot of you, or some of you, will be heading towards like ad land, and sorry to be the bearer of bad tidings, but I used to work 10 to 12 hours a day. So my only opportunity to upload content would be to and from on my way to work. So I really got into like this candid street photography style of shooting people while they were commuting to work. And I remember I would get home at about 8 o'clock at night, and I would sit there editing the photos I'd taken. The next thing I knew, it was 12 o'clock, and I'd have to get out for work the next day. I was engaging with the community, and I was like, this just can't go on. Like, I need to either monetize this in some way, or I need to quit it and prioritize my work. So I remember thinking to myself that I knew a few people were making a livelihood out of this just with their smartphone, and is this something I could do? I could see it increasingly happen at work. We were getting in touch with these, content creators and influencers to help us with our campaigns. So I said to myself, all right, actually, how can brands get in touch with me? There wasn't a way. At that time, Instagram, your bio didn't automatically include your email. So I just put up my email one day, and within 2 weeks, brands like Adidas, Jaguar, Lonely Planet got in touch. And I was like, well, I could be onto something here. So I continued doing that. Brands continued to get in touch. And then I politely asked my wife after about a year and said, look, I'm thinking about quitting my full-time job, my very secure job that I enjoy. And I really want to pursue this passion for smartphone photography. She looked at me. She's always been a great supporter of my kind of creative output. And she was like, go for it. You'll probably regret it if you don't do that. So there I did it. I kind of freelanced while I was trying to do this, but I was on my way. And over the next 2 years, I built up quite a decent client base just using my phone to shoot stuff. Now, at the same time, Twitter made an app, and it was called Vine. And Vine was basically the original TikTok. It was this how would you call it? It was just like the first video-based social platform that you could only access via the app. So you couldn't even access your photo gallery to upload photos. You'd have to make everything natively within the app, which was a great challenge. And the videos could only be 6 seconds long. And I remember I asked Twitter, I said, why are the videos only 6 seconds long? And they said they wanted to keep it on brand. They wanted it to be like, I'm not sure if X is the same, but I left X. I haven't used Twitter or X for a long time, but at the time you had a 140 character limit, and they wanted to keep that similar creative constraint when they moved into the world of video, so they said that's why they gave it a 6-second bridge. So I was curious with Vine, and I started experimenting with various little projects. It was a nice little creative outlet for me to keep doing moving image as well as photography on Instagram. And I remember one of my friends got in touch, and he was an award-winning animator. And he said to me, look, Twitter have just got in touch, and they are looking for people to really help brands make content on Vine. There's not many agencies doing it, and he's got quite a few briefs for us. So I was like, this is perfect. This is really going to help my freelance career. So me and him teamed up, and I think over the course of the next 2 years or 3 years while Vine existed. We managed to work on the Brazil World Cup. We worked on the Commonwealth Games with Samsung. We worked with Adidas at the Real Madrid team. We also worked on the Rugby World Cup and Football Manager. You know, somehow we got pigeonholed into being these sports creatives, and the irony was that neither of us were into sports whatsoever. So whenever we were going to film or do any content with a sports celebrity, we'd always ask the client to give us a photo and a little bio of who we were going to be filming, as we didn't really want to bruise anyone's ego. So what I'm going to do today is share two of my favorite Vine projects which I made, and then 2 of my favorite smartphone photography projects. Starting off with the Samsung That Sucks campaign, which was for the Commonwealth Games. Now, this was kind of funny because 2 years previous to this, I had just left Samsung as their creative director, but I was known as Balwinder Butler, not as Mr. Whisper. So when they sent me the email through, they were like, hey, we love the content you're making on Vine. They didn't realize that it was me. Only when I went in for the briefing, they were like, hang on a minute, we recognize you. You used to work here. So kind of gone full circle, went back in as a freelance creative for them. And this is kind of a distilled version of the brief that we received, me and my partner, Robert. Make a series of Vines using the Commonwealth Games as your backdrop. Create surprise and delight by featuring the Samsung Vitality vacuum within various events. And you know, that's obviously the product that we had to showcase. A little bit tricky because you don't normally see like vacuum cleaners on like any of the sports events or around the stadium, but we embraced the challenge. And you know, we did multiple concepts, but I think the one that I've chosen today, when you break it down, makes for quite an interesting case study. So this particular concept was called the Bolt concept, and we focused on the relay race. And the idea was here that, you know, you start off with the anticipation of like one of the runners on the blocks, you know, the gun goes off, they're off running, they pass the baton, but as you finally get to the final runner, instead of it being the baton passed, it's the vacuum hose being passed. So the client really liked that idea, we all had a little giggle, and it was signed off. So the next stage of this was for us to come up with the art direction and the animation style. So anyone who knows about animation will know that running can be one of the trickiest parts to pull off. And seeing as that was kind of fundamental to our concept, we had to ensure we nailed the running cycle. So we had to find a reference piece of footage here, which we then traced over, put our very, very simple kind of line drawing style art direction on, or look or feel, just using the Samsung Blue to keep it on brand, in order to get the concept signed off and move on to the next stage. So this is when the production really kicked in. So here we had to find a few more reference videos. We had to find a reference video of someone coming off the starting blocks, and then the handover of the baton, and then finally someone running along, adding in the products photorealistically, and then obviously building elements for the track, keeping everything very simple, because this was going to be a stop motion piece, and the less complicated, like stop motion's complicated enough without making any other of the elements complicated. So the next stage from here was to piece it all together within the environment and take each shot frame by frame, ensuring that we were getting this smooth animation. And this is the part that I really kind of enjoyed as well. And this is kind of how the process would look. It would be me spending hours in my studio just trying to get these things together, making sure that if we needed to add additional frames, we would do so. All in all, this process would take 5 days from conception to execution. Obviously, there were days where we had to allow the client to review, feedback, and make amends. But for us, our side of the process took 5 days between us two, and we had one assistant who would help with the cutting out of each of the frames. So, you know, that was all to deliver this 6 seconds worth of footage, which I will present now. So that was the final piece that we presented. So another one of my, definitely a career highlight for me was, as I said, we started to get pigeonholed into this sports content creators, which we don't know how it happened, but we weren't complaining. Especially when this brief came through, which was for the all-in or nothing Adidas Brazil World Cup. And this was, let me go on to the brief. So this was the original brief that we received from Adidas, and it was, create a series of Vine content to cover the entire Brazil World Cup, celebrating Adidas all-in or nothing moments during the games. Now, the all-in or nothing moments were basically the moments that you would see after a football match that you might see on the news. So those little bits where someone might have scored a goal, might have done a great pass, something along those lines. Now, the trick here was that, I can't remember, I think there's over 50 games that happened during the World Cup. Adidas had sponsored about 18 of them, and so they wanted us to make these vines for each of those games, but they didn't have any rights to the television footage. So they had seen that we'd done this video tracing style, and they wanted us to do that again. So we soon said, look, there's no way that we can do paper cutouts, within the time from the beginning to the end of a game. So the client would basically sit there watching a game, screen record 6 seconds of footage. We would be sitting in our studio we'd employed about 9 students to help us with the process. They'd send over this time-stamped video. Everyone would receive about half a second's worth of footage each. They would trace over it, and then by the end of each game, we would send it back to the client ready to post on Vine. So it was a very intense project, but very cool, great experience, and interesting to work out all the creative logistics. This was a great project, and here's a couple of the initial, this was the first bit of creative we sent them, where we showed them what the look and feel could look like. And then this is kind of what they ended up looking like. Sorry. But this was great. So great portfolio piece, we were up for that. However, if you're working on the Brazil World Cup, surely you should be going to Brazil, right? There's got to be a way for me and my creative partner, Robert, to get to Brazil. So we went to Adidas and said, look, is there any way that, if we come up with some concepts, would you let us fly out there and film some content before the World Cup? And they were like, if you can come up with the right concepts, we're happy for you to do so. So we got our creative thinking hats on and visited local stadiums like Wembley and anywhere that Adidas could get us access to, and came up with a whole load. This is just a handful. We came up with about 50 concepts because we really wanted to go to Brazil. And, sadly, well, they kind of liked it, but they were like, I'm just kidding, we made it. We got out there and, they signed off the creative brief. And as you can see, this is Robert, me, very chuffed to be out in Brazil. And I remember when we arrived at the media center with the rest of the world, everyone who was shooting content for Adidas, not in a creator sense, but in a very traditional sense back then. Me and Robert turned up with our rucksacks. Everyone else had huge flight cases with lights, tripods, all their camera gear, but we just had rucksacks, our phones, maybe a power bank, and a couple of extra lenses to stick on our phones. And people would just be looking at us, being like, "What the hell are you doing here?" And it was quite cool, because the fact we were going to get access to every stadium, all 9 stadiums around Brazil. It was a pretty tight schedule, just over 2 weeks to shoot content at the 9 stadiums. And so every day we would go and recce the stadium. The next day we would shoot the content, jump on a plane, go to the next stadium. Sadly, our luggage never made it, and so our luggage was chasing us the whole time we were in Brazil. We never actually got it until the last day. But luckily, all our equipment, fit in our hand luggage, so we didn't lose anything in that respect. And, here's where we got to the final stadium. This is the very famous Maracana, where the World Cup final was going to be held. And if anyone was to go on the pitch, which they barely allowed anyone on there, you had to take your shoes off. Anyone who handled the World Cup had to wear white gloves, as you can see Robert's wearing there. And there were also these big burly bodyguards who were standing around stopping anyone else from taking a photo of the World Cup because they were not allowed to. So we made like a few bits of creative. We made this one here, which had the nice backdrop lined up with the rest of the stadium. We had another two, one which was on the center spot, and then one which was made in the stands. So like, this is like one of the creatives we made. We literally had, I don't know, about 10 minutes with the World Cup. Very precious. So we wrapped up the Brazil shoot. We were like celebrating at our dinner. We were all very happy. And then our client got a call, and he was like, his smile dropped. He wasn't laughing anymore. Looked at us and he said, "Did you guys break the World Cup?" And we were like, well, you know, on that last bit, when we were spinning it the whole time, the bass and the whole thing kind of came apart. And, you know, when we put it back in the Louis Vuitton case, we just kind of held it together and didn't want to upset anyone. So, you know, I guess that's one of our claim to fame, that we broke the World Cup, which is, you know, something not a lot of people can say. But apart from that, you know, we came back with a whole load of content, which the client was happy with, and we were also very happy that we had the opportunity to make it for them. This was basically Adidas's whole campaign content created by me and my friend, which I don't know if that's still done in today's industry. So while Vine was going on, I was still working on my photography stuff on Instagram, and I remember this was one of the cooler projects that I worked on for Vodafone's launch of the iPhone 6S. Actually, I did actually find my, just to give you an idea. This is what I created all the content on. It's like one lens, you know, iPhone 5S, took me to Brazil, took me all over the world. Very proud to still have this. So then came along the iPhone 6S. And, you know, Vodafone approached me and said, look, we'd love to send you the new iPhone 6S. You can create some content for it. Along with that, we'd like to send you on an experience in London, like the London Eye, where you could get some like really nice perspective shots from there. Be a little bit unique and interesting for your audience. Now, not to sound ungrateful, I had just done a project on the London Eye, and I was like very protective over my feed and my audience. I was like, I don't think my audience are going to appreciate me doing the London Eye again. Could we do something else? So I pitched to them, you know, I said, look, this is the new iPhone coming out. We've got to do something pretty incredible. Creative director hat back on. So I pitched to them and I said, look, can't we just, we should go up in a helicopter and we should shoot London from a helicopter because that will be much more interesting and engaging. Don't think I've seen it done before. They got back to me and they were like, no, you can't do that. We haven't got the budget for it. We're not sure if the camera will perform. And so I was like, fine, if I come up with any ideas or if we can work in the future, great, that's really cool. And then a couple of months later, they like got in touch and they were like, oh, hi Bal, after informing Vodafone UK about your idea about the helicopter ride, we're pleased to say they loved your idea. So, very cool project that came together. And, you know, after a few cancellations because of the Great British weather, we managed to go up in the helicopter and shoot some shots with it. Now, considering I believe this was 2016, these were the photos that I managed to make with the iPhone 6S. I'm still pretty blown away by the detail of these, you know, these shots with the smartphone. Here's a couple more. And the one on the right turned out to be one of the hero images which they used. And the campaign was very well received. And in fact, it was used on, they decided to display it in the Metro and also on the Vodafone home blog. I'd not been in the Metro before, so that was kind of a nice moment for me. After this, I think in 2016, Google decided to release the Google Pixel. It was their first phone in the smartphone market, and I was invited, I was sent the camera ahead of time to make some content with it, but this project was a little bit different. They wanted me to sit down with the UK press and media and share my thoughts on how I felt the camera was, and then share the highlights, share the features that I felt were pretty good. And, you know, the only thing I want to say about this is that, you know, these were taken then, and I continue to work with Google, you know, on an ongoing basis, but these were taken with the Pixel 3 and in 2018, and still remain like some of my favorite shots that I've made with a smartphone. So then fast forward to 2020, back in the Samsung camp for me, and I was invited to help with the global launch of the Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra. And, you know, this was a bit of a unique project. There was 3 creators, photographers, videographers, whatever you'd like to call them, invited to do this. And my role was to highlight the camera's feature, which was called Bright Night. And one of the other people coming along was to highlight the zoom focus, the zooming capabilities. So I'm not sure if this was one of the first phones which came with multiple lenses on it. And then the other guy who came along with us was a videographer, and he had to showcase the video capabilities. And that was it. It was going to be a very kind of top secret kind of project. What they wanted to do was they wanted to take us out to San Francisco, and when we arrived there, they would hand us an envelope on camera. We'd open it up very kind of Top Gear style, and you'd be like given a challenge to do. And I remember the other 2 guys did their challenges first. One was, you know, for the zoom feature, we headed to the Golden Gate Bridge, really very, very nice location. And then for the second guy, we went to this really cool skate park. But for my location, we went to somewhere that, you know, looked like you'd filmed the Chainsaw Massacre or something. And then I was given my brief, which is this piece of video. Your task is to put the Galaxy S20 Bright Night feature to the test. Whoa.
Did you get it?
I got it. So these were some of the images that I got. First was this like guy who was welding stuff, but in this really, really very dark environment. So it was the ideal location to really showcase the low light capabilities of the phone, which again, I was pretty impressed with. Yep, I nearly did die shooting. Like, this is the lovely Shredder. She's like this fire performer, and she got, almost ended up killing me, but bless her, she was very sweet, and the shots I managed to get, I was very happy with, as was the client. So those are a few of the projects that I wanted to share with you. Now I've just got a few little, I guess, my go-to smartphone apps which I use, and when I'm shooting photography, normally I'll use the native camera on my phone, but I always use like Adobe Lightroom for my top level editing. Also, Snapseed is a very good tool for that. It has similar functionality. And Visco, I don't use it so much, but I used to really enjoy some of the filters that you could use with that. And as I mentioned, native camera apps these days are very powerful. On the video side of things, Adobe Rush, again, when I'm shooting any video content on my phone, which I shoot a lot of B-roll stuff with, I do a lot of the basic editing within that. I also equally use edits and CapCut. Edits is from Instagram, CapCut's from TikTok. But if you really want to get the full capabilities out of your camera, you should think about, when you're shooting video, you should think about using Filmic Pro or Blackmagic camera app. Both of those apps turn your camera into a professional video camera, basically giving you full kind of manual controls within the scenes. And then I've got kind of Premiere Pro and Lightroom Classics in brackets, because like I said, I do a lot of my top level editing in like on the mobile, but then when I want to do anything more in depth, I'll get onto my desktop or laptop and use Lightroom Classic or Premiere. Because it's on the Creative Cloud, I'm able to just seamlessly get those files and work in between mobile and laptop. So yeah, very, very helpful to be able to do that. Some smartphone tips. So here's like my 5 go-to tips, I'd say, if I was sharing anything. So I know it's called a mobile phone, but if you want to get a good photo, you really need to stop. You need to stop and hold your breath when you're taking a photo, and that's the best way you're going to get the most stable photo out of your phone. I see loads of people just using their phone and they're using, moving while they're doing it. Obviously, it's a different story if you're like trying to capture some video while you're moving, fine. But generally, stand still, hold your breath, and get that footage or content that you need. Number 2, and this is one that I've learned quite recently, using the wide-angle camera on your phone. Now, it's great for when you're in like a very kind of narrow environment. You want to get as much of the environment as you want. You stick it into wide-angle mode. But recently, while I was doing some video, I was like, I really need to get some of the textures on a bag and some zips and some dials on the camera. And I was about to buy a lens for about £1,200 for my big camera. However, I saw this hack online and they were like, just use your wide angle as a macro lens. And I was pretty much blown away. You can go right in and you can get very decent quality shooting in 4K, which was more than enough for me. So that's quite a good one, and it can save you a bit of money. Portrait mode. Portrait mode is great for when you want to isolate your subject. So if you are shooting a product, you're shooting your food, you're shooting a portrait, put it in portrait mode, it will soften the background and definitely make your subject pop. Sunglasses as an ND filter. So what an ND filter does, for those who don't know, is basically it helps with the exposure of the photo you're taking. So on a day like today where the sun is very bright, you should have sunglasses with you. Just stick the sunglasses in front of your lens and then you take the photo or make the video content. And then last but not least, shooting in pro mode for either like video or photo. So for photos, you'd be shooting in RAW, which is a setting you can add on your phone, or you can shoot in log for video. And what that does is just the file sizes will be much larger, but what they're going to allow you to do in post-production is allow you to get a lot more detail. So if you're shooting at night and you can barely see much of the environment that's going on, if you shoot in log or RAW, once you take it into post-production, you'll be able to lift that photo out of the dark. So shooting in those two really is something you should try out on your phones. So here's some of the camera and smartphone accessories that I've built up over time. And I think, the one thing I try to do is I don't like to have too much gear, he says, with a table full of gear. But this stuff has built up over a decade. And what I try to do is make sure that the bits and pieces that I do purchase, I can use on my big camera as well as my smartphone. So for example, where you can see the little tele lens and the wide lens, those are like 2 lenses I can attach to my smartphone when I use the lens case. But then what they also allow me to do is use my cine filters and my mist filters on the smartphone as well. So originally the cine filters are used on my big camera, but when I just, unscrew the end of the tele lens or the white lens, I'm able to attach them onto there. And what that does is it softens the videos that I'm making with my phone. So if I'm shooting in this environment, for example, if I was to point the camera at the light, it would soften the light, it would give you some halation, because sometimes you can find that smartphone footage can be incredibly sharp. Or you can go to the absolute extreme and rig out your camera like this, which is kind of how people are doing these days when they're using their smartphone within an industry environment or when they're creating short films, which leads me perfectly onto my next slide, which is smartphones used to make in the industry these days. So here's a couple of examples. One was shot by famous director Ridley Scott, shot on the Samsung S23 Ultra. It's called Behold. Really nice bit of cinematography, especially, the fact that he used a phone. And then more recently, director Anil Karia, starring Stormzy in Big Man, which was, I think, released a couple of weeks ago, shot on the iPhone 16 Pro. Now, I've seen 2 behind-the-scenes videos from the directors in these, and, the key takeout on from both directors was the fact that the phone really allowed them to get intimate. With Ridley Scott, he likes to get very intimate within his environments, go into small spaces, behind cupboards, behind very, very intimate spaces, and a phone allowed him to do that. So he really enjoyed that. With Anil Karia, he likes to get intimate with his cast. And he said this was for both of them, it was the first time using a smartphone to make a short film. And he said when he was using this on set, when he's not used to using this big cinema setup, it's not very conducive for the actors to get very intimate with it. But when he was using the phone, he said it really helped them kind of be much more relaxed in front of the camera. So there's definitely a time and place where a smartphone has its advantages over big cinema camera setups. Another example, and this time being used on the big screen in cinema. Last week, F1 the movie came out by Joseph Kosinski, featuring Brad Pitt, Damson Idris, and Lewis Hamilton. And in this scenario, Kosinski really wanted people to feel and know what it felt like to be inside an F1 racing car. And he didn't want to use a green screen. He wanted better quality than a GoPro or anything that we are used to seeing on TV. So he was keen to use an iPhone. So what he did was they broke down an iPhone into little pieces and made it fit into one of the parts of a F1 machine, which you can see up here, and then it was attached to the fin there, giving you this incredible view of the F1 races. All the sequences were shot within real F1 races, so they couldn't use a big cinema rig because it would slow everyone else down and get in the way. So in order to get that absolutely authentic footage, this was the right solution. And then lastly, 28 years later, again, this was just released last week by one of my favorite directors, Danny Boyle. Now, Danny Boyle loves to play with different cameras. And if you go back to the version, I think it was called 28 Weeks Later, 28 Weeks Later, he also shot that using not the latest technology, but the technology that felt right for his storytelling. So with 28 years later, he embraced the iPhone, and he wanted a few scenes where he had that bullet time sequence. So for anyone who's seen The Matrix, where they've got that famous scene where a rig of cameras sweep round someone, showing that one moment, but in almost a 180 degrees angle, that's how they achieved it. But by Danny Boyle employing the iPhone, he's got 20 iPhones there, all rigged up. And due to the nature of them being very light, you can actually move with them. And so he wanted at some points within the movie for the movie to go from 2D to 3D. And this is what enabled him to do that. And you can see also being able to create very certain rigs, which you wouldn't be able to do with cinema cameras or multiple versions on running shots or moving shots. I think one of the coolest things that he said in his interview when he was talking about 28 years later, now I must say, there's been a little bit of controversy about him shooting the whole film, but I know that he's only shot certain sequences with the iPhone Pro, but he's used a whole range of cameras to make the film. But I think the poignant message that he left with me was definitely the fact that, he said, I don't want to get this wrong. He said, don't respect the older generation too much. And this is for future filmmakers. He said, if you just continue to use the best gear and everything that you see people using, we're just going to have the same version of storytelling. But if you be experimentative, you can definitely come out with, new bits of energy and narrative like that. So, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will, if you've got any questions. Any questions? Any questions?
So what phone are you using currently to film content?
I use a Samsung S24 Ultra. That's my camera of choice.
Thank you.
Hi, and thank you very much. That's really enlightening. It sort of takes out the limitation or reinforces the fact that the limitation is in our head rather than our gear. What I was curious about is the way, because you seem to be in the cutting edge of what phones can do. The question is, what do you think that's going to be like in the next 5 years? Would you even have the need to buy a Samsung or Sony or a big rig? Do you think that will be necessary in the next 5 years as security?
I think, and it was a little bit difficult to hear what you were saying, and I don't know if it was like the speakers, but for me, it was a little bit difficult. But
Do you want me to clarify?
I think you're saying, let me repeat your question. Like, is it worth getting a big camera, or do you think smartphones will replace everything in the next 5 years?
Yeah, if a smartphone. So basically, since you've been on the cutting edge of smartphone innovation in cameras, do you think it will even be necessary to buy a Blackmagic or a Sony? Because if you can achieve all you can achieve, for example, all Apple's events now are filmed on the iPhone, and they have rigs built out for them. In the next 5 years, do you see an industry where there will even be need for those big rigs, especially the pro consumer cameras like the Blackmagics and the Sonys and the Canon?
That's a good question. Whenever I've been working with phones, over the last decade, each iteration gets better and better and closer to, the bigger cameras that we have. I was always of the mentality or thought that I think there'll always be a time and place for a smartphone, and there'll be a time and place like for the big cameras. But with the way that technology is moving, everything's getting smaller. There is a potential where things might get so small that you might be able to place it in a camera. But I think you'll still be like in part of that will be, when I showed one of the iPhones completely rigged out, it's still going to be as big as like a big camera. So I think there's a time and a place for where you can use a smartphone, like when you want to be nimble, you want to be quick. And one of the things I didn't mention for 28 years later was the fact that the whole premise of the film is that there's been this virus that's taken over the country for 28 years later. So lots of things should have been untouched. So if they had gone in with a big cinema rig, things would have been kind of, put out of place, the environment. But by being able to go in with an iPhone rig and make those scenes, their footprint was much smaller. So it did help the story in those cases. So I think there will be a time and place for both. I don't think one will suit one version of storytelling more than the other. I think smartphone companies would love that to be the case, but I just don't know if that's possible.
Thank you.
No, pleasure. I think behind you.
Hello, I'm Aysun from LBB. If you would make a guide for broke students, and if you think about what is absolutely crucial and what is optional, what would you say? Would you say invest in a good phone, an Adobe, a good mic, and that's it? Or do you have other crucials and then optionals, basically?
I think if this was a guide for someone who was starting out, then I think a phone, a good microphone, and then some of those other accessories which I highlighted on my smartphone accessories would be all you need to get started. I think that the fact that people are making, even if it's just slices of major movies with a phone, tells you how much you can really create. You shouldn't, I've got a lot of friends who just have like gear acquisition syndrome and need to buy everything before they can start a project, whereas I'd much prefer seeing what I have in hand and trying to make it with that, and only if I'm forced to get something else I will. I think it's much more of a, like, I like having those creative restraints. And, you know, it goes back to when I first started shooting, I never wanted to be a photographer. And it was only the fact that, like, Instagram was like a smartphone only, you know, camera safe zone. So, you know, there weren't these DSLRs. So it really kind of democratized photography for me, invited me into that world, and something that I didn't know I would love so much. So I think you can definitely start that way, and then whichever way your journey kind of progresses, and whatever you need should be fit for purpose. I think that's key.
Hello. Oh, check. Thank you. So I noticed that you had Behold and Big Man part of your presentation, and I was wondering, in your opinion, where do you draw the line between branded content and see, I shouldn't even say, for lack of a better term, because, you know, really what I want to say is authentic storytelling, authentic, you know, true to the craft is probably really what I'm going at, in the sense that, you know, it's filmmaking is at this point heavily driven by social media, and there is, in my opinion, a misunderstanding of what integrity is when it comes to filmmaking. Where do you personally draw the line between, you know, partnerships with corporations, but then also being authentic as a filmmaker?
Okay, so I think it's a good question, and I think you need to have a balance between the two, because if you want to be doing filmmaking in this day and age, I mean, for me personally, it's nowhere near filmmaking. I'm more kind of like short form content, enjoying like that transition from photography to video making, and that's probably the best place for me to answer that question. And in order to make a living, I need to have these brand partnerships. But I think more importantly, I need to have passion projects on the side, which I need to create that, you know, actually stimulate me creatively. And that was part of my journey. The fact that, you know, I did love my job when I worked in advertising, helping, you know, Samsung and iPhones promote their phones. But to me, the real buzz was when I was able to let go, start my own little Mr. Whisper Studios, and then work with brands in, you know, with them one-to-one, and then bring my kind of vision to life through them supporting it. So I think there's a fine balance to be had with it. There's definitely, you know, I'm from a very kind of traditional advertising background, and, you know, I definitely had to put my 10,000 hours in to call myself a photographer. But in this social media world, you know, I remember I saw this really funny reel where this guy was like, I've just bought a guitar. That means I'm a musician now. Whereas, you know, that happens a lot when as soon as someone buys a camera, they're now a photographer or a filmmaker. So I think it's all down to the individual's morals, and it's also it's very subjective to what their audience and how they, you know, kind of receive the content that they're creating. But I think on a personal level, it's very important you do have to survive, and, you know, being a creative, this is the way that new creatives are making money through, like, content creation. But just as importantly for me, I divide my time 50-50 for passion projects and branded work. I hope that answers.
Hi, I just got a question about mainly content creation. What advice would you give to someone like wanting to grow their following on, like, Instagram, for example?
It's going to sound really cliche, right? But you need to be authentic. Like, the fact, you know, a lot of my friends want to do similar stuff to like me. They want to work with brands individually and get content creation gigs. And they're like, but everything's been done. And as soon as you've got that mindset, that's just going to be a complete kind of creative barrier for you. The thing that makes brands approach you is you. Like, if me and you both made an ad for this bottle, for example, we'd both have different opinions, right? So the fact that you just have to do it your way and not copy anyone else is, for me, the biggest thing. it's very easy to like be doom scrolling on Instagram and seeing this guy who's doing like very well, doing everything, you know, it's like, and then you just think, oh, I should just do it like him. I should just copy them. And, you know, to my horror, a lot of people these days are advising people to just copy and paste other creative until you make it. I refuse to do that. Like, and that's probably why my numbers are stuck at a very, like, you know, they haven't moved in years. But I think for me, if brands want to work with me, they appreciate my creative and my, you know, way of storytelling, as opposed to looking at large numbers and thinking, right, that's what we want. So for me, I know, and your question was based on like growing a following. So I think you just have to be like, you have to stick at it. You have to find your tone of voice. You have to build your own brand and think, how would you react to certain things differently to how any others would, because social media is all about your unique voice being heard.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, firstly, for all the advice. It was invaluable. Again, you mentioned you started short-form content and you know, creating short-form content at a time where things were changing digitally on social platforms and everything. But in a market like you know, today, basically, where everything's just so saturated, like, you know, purely in content terms, and as a filmmaking sort of, as a student studying film and TV myself, I want to strike that balance and, you know, make a living out of that sort of practice and put the technical skills to use. So what would be your number one advice for someone to start collaborating with brands and get into that short form content space full time?
So you said you studied filmmaking, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so already you've got yourself a good head start there, because video is definitely like what all brands are looking for right now. So my best advice again would be showcase your storytelling the way that you tell it. It's not easy work. Like me moving into video, I see how much harder it is for me to create like a piece of, like last year I did a challenge, 50 days of like content every single day. It nearly killed me. Did I get loads more work? Nothing. Tumbleweed, right? And I was like, but that's what everyone tells you to do. However, 4 months later, in early 2025, I think the algorithm started to push that content up, and all my kind of strategic work came to fruition. The brands that I wanted to work with suddenly got in touch, and I started making those projects. So the only thing I was thinking at the back of my mind was like, I wish I had studied filmmaking, videography, knew how to do it properly, as opposed from transitioning, because then I would have a head start. And for someone like you to say that, you know, all my friends who are actual student filmmakers now showcasing, like if they're not got branded projects, they are, you know, reviewing stuff themselves, and the quality of their video content is above and beyond people who haven't studied it. Like for someone with me, I can certainly notice the difference in that, and I do really envy them. You know, the other week I was doing a workshop just around here, and one of the guys who came to the workshop, he was a filmmaker, and he was, you know, he had a bag with him, but he unpacked it, and it turned out into a kit, something like that. But he had a monitor on it, and I was like, dude, we're only here on a workshop. Like, what are you doing with that stuff? And the next day, when I saw the content that he had created with it, I was immediately inspired to be like, I need to be carrying that kind of gear around in order to make that quality level of content. And I think when brands would be able to see that, they would much rather get in touch with you, you know, even if you haven't got a large following. They might just want you to create content for the brand themselves rather than, you know, to post on your own feed. Also, another way in is to share a lot of your behind the scenes, like seeing the behind the scenes, like maybe that's me just being curious on how a filmmaker works, but that kind of content is gold. So that would be my best advice for you in approaching the social space.
Thank you.
Hi, so I had some question about, do you have any advice on how to best showcase my creative work online? And maybe, do you have any tips on that? And which platform do you think actually might attract potential people who might be hiring in agencies or brands? Like LinkedIn, TikTok, maybe Instagram, like on which platforms they actually might be looking for talent that way?
Okay, so I think, depending on what kind of work you do, I think, Instagram's well known for short form content and for photography as well. Photography is just hanging in there. It's much more video based at the moment. But I think this is something I should have added to my last question as well. But YouTube is a great space if you're showcasing video. Like, I think on there, numbers don't matter as much. I see my YouTube channel as a pension plan. It's like, for me, if I continue doing it one day, it's going to start giving me a revenue, which I've just kind of crossed the border on, which I'm very excited. But I've been getting, like, I've only got like 3,000 subscribers on there, but I must have had like 12 different business opportunities that have come through, simply because I'm someone different in the space that they've not seen before. TikTok, I just post stuff on TikTok because it's the place to be. I'm not quite sure how the business model works on there, but I hear stories about it, so I need to just be able to be on these. Basically, I want to be on all the different touch points where a brand might be able to find me. So, it's a very generic answer, but I don't think there's a one answer that fits all.
Yeah, so I've been doing social media for a few years, social media marketing, but trying to shift more into copywriting. So maybe you have a less generic answer for that.
Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, so basically copywriting, to showcase copywriting work.
I'm not getting that at all. Sorry. Could you repeat the question?
So basically, what is the best platform to showcase copywriting work?
What's the best place to share your
Copywriting.
corporate work?
Copywriting.
Oh, copywriting. Thank you. That's a good question. I think it would probably have to be something like this is just me thinking off the top of my head now, but I would probably suggest it would have to be. And is this just pure copywriting, or within the context of like ads or film? It is within. Yeah, so I would showcase it within those ads themselves. Definitely have a portfolio website of your own where people can learn more about you, because as dead as like websites are, they are still a home for you to be able to tell your full story and not just like a 15-second, 30-second clip about yourself. Thank you.
Quick question. Of course, we've been you've done both photography and video is sort of the medium of the moment, so to speak. Do you see there might be like video fatigue coming, or no? Just purely your opinion, I'm just curious.
Sorry, it's really hard.
Video fatigue. Do you think there'll be video fatigue because of the amount going around?
I don't at the moment. I mean, that's just me speaking personally, and I also hope not, because I'm investing a lot of time and energy into video. I think it makes a lot of sense to me because, through photography, it's very hard to get a message across. But then when you do it through video, it's probably a much better storytelling, medium. So, but it's certainly getting to a point, like what will be next? Because, at first there was photography, oversaturated video. Definitely, it's just overwhelming with the amount of content out there. So it will be interesting to see what happens next. Maybe it's going to be like retro websites, come back into fashion. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And who knows what AI is going to do to, switch the landscape.
We've come to time, unfortunately. That's it. But thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for hanging around.